And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, February 23rd. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, Congress.gov is gearing up for another round of user research after a revealing set of interviews late last year. Plus, the BIOSECURE Act is coming, and no contractor is as biotech-free as they think. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The National Institutes of Health continued to lean into the use of artificial intelligence last year. The NIH has now initiated more than 100 AI pilots over the last few years. Those efforts ramped up as the health agency also navigated staffing cuts and other turmoil in 2025. With more detail, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now. Justin, great to have you.
Good to be here, Terry.
So what is going on at NIH when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, the NIH is really a prolific user of artificial intelligence when you compare it to a lot of other federal agencies. And the number of AI use cases at the NIH increased to 124 in fiscal 2025. That's up from 82 use cases tallied in 2024. And that's up from 47 tallied in 2023. So you've seen almost a tripling of AI use cases at NIH in just a couple of years. The Department of Health and Human Services as a whole saw a 65% increase in the number of AI use cases in 2025. So clearly, HHS is kind of all in on this AI, using AI. Now, NIH has been able to take advantage of the OneGov deals that the General Services Administration has struck with a lot of the leading AI firms. But at the same time, it's also just having to make up for the fact that there are less staff at the NIH over the last year or so. Here's Nick Weber, Acting Director in the Office of Scientific Computing Services at NIH.
We've also had to weather the storm of changes in personnel, rifts in different parts of the organization, and everyone's grappling with how can we be more productive, how can we make sure we still provide the services that are needed with a diminished staff. And AI has really been a boon toward being able to do that, both from the administrative and kind of health coordination side that we do at NIH, as well as delivery in the clinical center and across the board. So I think it's both out of necessity and out of just interest and opportunity.
Well, this may be the first place where we're matching the promise of AI to fill in for staff reductions. What are some of the specific ways that NIH is using AI?
Yeah, Weber said that, they're using it across the spectrum of NIH work, from administrative tasks like analyzing the agency's grants portfolio to research support, lab work, clinical assistance, preclinical work. Weber, during his appearance, pointed to a lot of really interesting examples. One of them to pull out was NIH's efforts to create what he called domain-specific small language models trained on NIH's health data sets. So these are not, just letting ChatGPT run rampant or any of the big, frontier large language models on NIH's data sets, but, fine-tuned models that are going to be able to analyze NIH's core data sets for things like Alzheimer's research. And then NIH wants to make those data sets and those models available to the broader research community, where they can ask questions and work with these more specific disease data sets. And so that could be a really interesting use case for how NIH does things. But really, Weber said they're looking across the board at how AI can, in many cases, be an assistant across the different work that NIH does.
Are they running into any particular challenges as they roll through this approach?
Well, it's probably a common challenge, and that's scaling these different pilots. As I mentioned, over 120 different AI use cases. Many of those are in the pilot phase or in the pre-deployment phase. And, NIH is a pretty big and diverse organization. And so Weber, from his perch at the kind of central IT office, said that scaling is really the big challenge at NIH.
We have so many pilots and we have so many opportunities to bring things to the broader NIH community, and doing that in a way that is not haphazard, in a way that's not duplicative, because there's so many ideas. Somebody probably has an idea over here that we also had over there. NIH is a big place, is a real challenge. And I think, probably the areas that we struggle with the most are coordination across a big, complex organization that has 27 institutes that have all been highly autonomous for years, and there's more push to centralize on things. That's a challenge.
So, Justin, what role is NIH's Center for Information Technology playing when it comes to scaling AI across the whole gamut of NIH efforts?
Yeah, there are a few different things that that central IT office is doing at NIH. Recently, or just within the last couple of years, they've established a generative AI community of practice. Weber said that now involves roughly 2,000 people across NIH, so a pretty substantial amount of the 17,000 or so employees at NIH. He said the group meets twice a month and offers training, including for NIH leaders. And what that group did was really help just normalize the idea of using AI and showing ways that NIH could safely and securely use AI in different ways. Another thing that the central IT office is doing at NIH, he mentioned there's 27 separate institutes and centers. That's very diverse. A lot of those institutes and centers have a lot of power over their budget and what they can do. Weber said that they're trying to push out things through their central funding program, but they're also trying to push out playbooks. So for enterprise AI rollouts, that means making sure that people have a central kind of playbook for IT service support for an AI that might go out there into the wild or at NIH, or just communicating with different stakeholders who might need to know about a new AI tool that they might be able to leverage instead of starting a new AI pilot of their own. And so there's this big effort just around communication coming out of NIH's Center for Information Technology when it comes to AI.
With all of these pilot projects in the works and all of this different administration, what's next on the horizon for AI at NIH?
Well, one thing that Weber mentioned NIH is concerned about, which I thought was really interesting, is these OneGov deals and kind of the long-term implications of these really astounding deals that GSA has been able to strike with these different AI firms. They've been able to strike these deals where OpenAI and some of the big AI firms are offering entire agencies access to these AI platforms for $1 a year or less in some cases. And of course, that's been a boon for agencies getting into AI and starting to roll out some of these use cases. And Weber alluded to that at the NIH. It's helped them really get the ball rolling here. But they're also kind of concerned about what are the implications down the line when some of these perhaps really good deals run out and they have to renegotiate.
That's a good thing, but it's also a worrisome thing for many at NIH because this is what I like to call the drug dealer model, right? They get you hooked, and then you'll pay anything to continue to use it. And so we're worried about what is it going to look like? How are we going to decide when we have people using all of these different products? Where do we invest? How do we invest to make sure people can continue to get the benefits of the products? In general, I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great way to partner with industry. I am worried about the back end as to how we're going to sustain these things when we've become so reliant on them and it no longer costs $1.
Well, Justin, it sounds like NIH may be showing us what the frontier of effective AI deployment looks like.
Yeah, we'll have to see how they manage all of these different issues, but certainly a lot of commonalities, I'm sure, across the federal government and how they're addressing these types of things.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, the BIOSECURE Act is coming, and no contractor is as biotech free as they think. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A new federal law is about to require contractors to map their supply chains, vet their vendors, and prove they're not relying on banned biotech companies. Many firms will discover exposure they didn't know they had. We'll explain what's at stake with Alex Major, partner and co-chair of the Government Contracts and Global Trade Practice at McCarter and English. Mr. Major, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
There is a part of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2026 that I want to ask you about, the BIOSECURE Act. What is this and why is it so important?
The BIOSECURE Act is a kind of a unique provision. It's really a supply chain visibility and federal funding compliance regime that is intended to cut across industry. And its intent really is to safeguard U.S. national security by restricting federal agencies from engaging with certain biotechnology entities. And it's pretty broad and pretty wide-reaching.
Well, in fact, that broad definition is part of what may make this challenging. It's everything from lab equipment to cloud tools. If you're a contractor and you don't think you have anything to do with biotechnology, how should you approach this?
Yeah, that's the key issue here. The Act really does broadly define biotechnology equipment or services. So focusing on what they're talking about, really, it's instruments and devices that could be used in research, development, production, or analysis of biological materials. And that would include things like components and necessary software or firmware. We can get into that in a little bit. But it also addresses services related to data storage, transmission. COVID's still in the rear view, so disease detection, genealogical information, which I know is a lot of all the rage, and then consulting or support services tied to biotechnology equipment. So there really is quite a big or a long tail to this, and the expansive definition really does encompass a wide range of things like laboratory platforms, sequencing technology, bioinformatic tools, and data handling infrastructures. So it is pretty broad.
So some of that, if you were in the business, you'd know, and you'd be thinking about those kinds of things. But you mentioned software and firmware. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is where I think a lot of companies might find themselves in a bad situation when they say, oh, we're a technology firm, we're a software firm, or we're a defense contractor, right? We don't do biotechnology. We're not biotechnology. That's pharma or whatever. But if you're a defense contractor, so for example, that builds aircraft maintenance software, right, for the DoD, you're not a biotech company. Your product is logistics and maintenance tracking. But inside your systems, maybe there's one module that handles something like occupational health monitoring for maintenance crews. And that module uses a third-party cloud analytic, process blood test data for exposure to hazardous materials, right? Something like that. Then, honestly, that analytics vendor uses an outsourced biomarker analysis process for biological samples. The prime contractor is performing federal work. Biological data is being processed somewhere in the performance chain. The biotech capability is outsourced and buried deep in the infrastructure. So therefore, if any vendor in the chain is later designated a biotechnology company of concern, that prime contractor is on the hook for possibly violating the BIOSECURE Act. So the key point here is that prime contractor, they never intended to do biotech. We're not a biotech company. But biological data processing was still a part of how that federal work was performed. And that's exactly the kind of hidden supply chain risk the Act is designed to service.
It sounds like you could be playing 6 degrees of separation for a really long time with this rule.
You really can. You really can. And it's going to hit everyone, right? I mean, the important part of the product here is there somewhere where this technology touches biotechnology?
Well, one of the things I suspect will clarify that is that OMB and GSA have to write the rules, and part of the rules will be a companies of concern list. Is that correct?
Correct. There's two things that companies need to look for in their supply chain. First, they can do it right now. They can go to 1260H, which is the Chinese military concern list. And there are already some biotechnology companies already on there, and that was actually the impetus for a lot of this. BGI Genomics and some others are already identified as Chinese military companies operating in the United States that could affect this. But then, you're right, there's going to be a separate list that OMB is putting together that can designate entities of BCC, so biological companies of concern, based on criteria such as foreign adversary control, involvement in biotech, and potential national security risks. So it's not just relegated to China. It could be much broader.
I'm speaking with Alex Major. He's a partner and the co-chair of the Government Contracts and Global Trade Practice at McCarter and English. So once all of those pieces fall into place, we have FAR rules, we have companies of concern list. What do you think contractors will actually have to certify, and how will this sort of roll out in everyday practice?
Well, we're not going to see it for a little bit. So the good news here is that companies have until June of 2028 to get there. That should not be a sigh of relief. That should be oh my gosh, we've got a lot of work. It's like marathon training. But really, I think once they do that, it's going to be the same sort of issues that they face now with a lot of their compliance obligations, that you're going to be seeing a lot of implied certifications, right? This is material to this national security concerns, I think the government would argue. So as a result, they're just going to expect you do it, like you're doing with Kaspersky, like you're doing with Huawei, like you're doing with other portions of Chinese military companies, where you have an understanding and visibility into your supply chain. So it's very important for companies and universities and grant research institutions to understand their supply chain and where this could affect them.
We're seeing a lot of focus these days on supply chain compliance in a variety of fashions. As you talk about companies mapping their supply chains early, tell us a little bit more about where they should be focused, what they should be looking for, and how they should be taking maybe corrective action now to get ahead of this 2028 implementation rule.
Yeah, I think with this one in particular, right, this is another rung on that compliance ladder, that supply chain ladder. But they really, companies and universities, and I can't stress that, I've seen it a lot with the universities and research hospitals, because it does affect grants as well as federal contracts. You really need a map where biotechnology touches the business, right? And that includes downstream tiers. You have to understand, where that biotechnology rub is, and then also assess foreign ownership, control, and influence risk across your vendors. Are there vendors that, and again, this is such a volatile market where there's acquisitions, weekly of companies like this. So you need to figure that out, and it really comes down to focusing on where biosecure risk will show up contractually in your systems. And maybe it's programmatic, maybe it's by contract, but it really comes down to understanding where or if your technology or service attaches to anything related to what could be considered biotechnology. And then, just validate your ability to make future certifications and representations that need to be made.
When you gave us an example at the beginning of this conversation, it was several layers of embedded technology and software. Let's say a company gives this their very best shot. They have done their very best comprehensive review, and they still don't find something that comes up later in a compliance check. What does that mean? What do the rules allow? What provisions will cover that?
Yeah, well, the rules are still being built. Obviously, we won't see the FAR amendment until probably 2028. So long as OMB meets their guidance. We've had some problems with that lately. But what you're going to see at the very least is probably, if you find out about it or when you find out about it, a mandatory disclosure obligation, because you are supposed to meet these requirements, or you will be required to meet these requirements. So it's not in the FAR yet, but it is coming up. So in regards to what happens if and when, still remains to be seen. But really, the implication could be that your supply chain goes on halt. And once you find it, you need to immediately pivot to find a new source. And that becomes very problematic, especially as you're proceeding and trying to perform your contract. So understanding those pivot points, or at least understanding where you need to be when that happens, or if that happens, is going to be imperative. And again, this is not just focused on China. It can be any number of quote unquote national security requirements.
Do you think this is kind of a tip of the iceberg? Will the scope expand? Will other sorts of technologies be brought into similar sorts of agreements?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think this is interesting because where we can talk about it from the Department of Defense standpoint, don't forget this is a FAR clause. So we will see this in agriculture. We will see this affecting pharmaceutical companies that, are just responding to government contracts or federal funding or federal research dollars. So it really does remain to be seen how far and where else we'll see supply chain issues go. This has been brewing for a couple of years now, but this one is going to be rather expansive, I think.
I've been speaking with Alex Major. He's a partner and co-chair of the Government Contracts and Global Trade Practice at McCarter English. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, a new Supreme Court ruling has upended the president's global tariff plan just as Congress faces fresh pressure to avert a partial shutdown at Homeland Security. But first, Congress.gov is gearing up for another round of user research after a revealing set of interviews late last year. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. After completing interviews with congressional and public users in November and December, the Congress.gov team is preparing for a new research phase this spring. The insights from last year's sessions are guiding the next steps in modernizing the user experience. I'll explore the takeaways and what's ahead with Chief of the Design Division in the OCIO at the Library of Congress, Kristen Davis. Kristen, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Well, I want you to bring us up to speed because you launched the call for volunteers, users of your system back in September of 2025. What was the goal when you rolled out this program?
The Congress.gov team wanted to learn, how do congressional and public users leverage Congress.gov for their work? What works well with Congress.gov? What's not working well with Congress.gov? And how do congressional and public users leverage other sites or tools for their work?
As you think about a user-centered design, how does that really shape how your team approaches the utility of the site?
User-centered design really shapes everything that the Library of Congress does in terms of creating digital solutions. It's really critical in the software and system development to put the users at the center of the process. It allows us to build solutions that meet users' needs and expectation and reduces the need to do rework if we don't hit the mark when we're creating these digital solutions.
When you think of your user community, who's in it? Who are the users of Congress.gov?
Everyone. So Congress.gov really is a resource that is available for everyone. So it's for the American public. It's also designed for congressional staff as well. So I consider our audience to be anyone and everyone.
Well, this has got to be an exciting project then. We were originally scheduled to speak about it back in October, right when the shutdown hit. How did the shutdown disrupt your plans for the initial round of interviews?
Obviously, we couldn't conduct these interviews during the shutdown, but once we were back to work, one of the top priorities of the team was to be able to reschedule all of the interviews and to complete them within 2 to 3 weeks. And I'm delighted to say that we were able to hit that goal. We did not need to re-recruit anyone. We were able to get all of those sessions rescheduled and completed in that quick turnaround time frame.
My read there would be that these were people who really wanted to give you feedback then.
Yes, absolutely. All of the folks that we talked to were really engaged and excited to be able to talk about Congress.gov with us.
I said you got all of those interviews in November and December. What were the biggest themes or takeaways that emerged from those sessions?
The biggest theme was really how valuable Congress.gov is for people. The site was definitely considered a valued and trusted resource that people were able to leverage.
Did they express what they used it the most for?
It was really to be able to stay informed about current legislation as well as being able to go back and look at historic information too.
These kinds of interviews typically provide the conducting organization information about what's working well and what's maybe not working so well. Was there anything in the feedback that surprised you or that was particularly useful?
The one thing that definitely surprised me with talking to our public participants was people didn't realize that you could create an account and that the benefits of creating an account on Congress.gov. So when you have an account, you're able to save searches and then also set up alerts so that you're informed when there are changes with whatever thing you might have signed up for an alert to. So that was really something that I was surprised by, that this great feature was missed. And there were a few participants who pointed out during the interview session that they noticed it for the very first time while we were talking.
Did you then take action to make that a more visible portion of the site?
That's absolutely on our roadmap to iterate on, is to make sure that that feature is being highlighted in a way that it can be noticed by more people and we can get people utilizing that helpful feature more.
I'm speaking with Kristen Davis. She's the chief of the design division at the OCIO of the Library of Congress. So, Kristen, as you went through the sessions with your users in that first round, have you seen changes in user expectation among the congressional staff that you work with regularly or other folks who might make that visit to the site?
I would say that user experience, it's always changing. So commonly people are constantly interacting with digital products. And typically it's not the digital product that you're creating or that you're responsible for. It's everything that's out there. So people really expect sites to work like the other sites that they're on more frequently. So really the idea of making sure that Congress.gov is presenting information that is easy and simple to get to and to understand.
Do you find that different segments of your user population have different needs? I mean, staff might have one need, the general public another, high schoolers researching a paper or something else, reporters a different way of approaching the data.
Absolutely. And because the site is geared towards anyone, it's a balancing act to figure out how do we present this information to such a wide variety of users. And I would say one of the groups that really has a much different use case are the congressional staff. So they're much more familiar with Congress.gov because they're on the site either daily or weekly, and they're very familiar with it. So we need to make sure that, as we evolve the site to be able to support their needs, we need to keep in mind that making significant changes will impact their workflow and potentially change the current design. So there's that balance with enhancing the site, but also not doing these drastic, wide sweeping changes, which might then negatively impact some of those users who are very familiar with Congress.gov.
Sort of designing for your power user, right?
Right.
One of the things that the December update on this project mentioned is that you're going to have another round of research coming up early in the spring. What will that next phase focus on?
So the next phase of user research is going to be conducting usability testing. And so in usability testing, we'll ask participants to complete a set of predefined activities in order to measure how effectively people can complete common activities using Congress.gov.
Are you looking for different groups of participants this time around, different demographics, or maybe just the occasional user again?
So we're absolutely looking for folks who didn't participate in the interview phase, so new people, so that we're getting a great representative sample of users. And we're looking for a mix of demographic information as well as familiarity with Congress.gov. So both, very familiar as well as folks who might have just gone to the site once a long time ago.
If we've got a listener out there who thinks, I've got some things I want to make sure they know about, how can we get them involved?
So they can send an email to user-resource@info@loc.gov. And you would be sending your name, your email address, and whether or not you are a government employee.
So we'll make sure that they've got that address. But how do these ongoing research cycles fit into the longer-term evolution strategy of Congress.gov?
Well, at the Library of Congress, we have a culture for conducting user research on a regular basis. And this really helps us to continue to provide useful and usable digital products that meet the needs and expectations of our users.
And so when you think about this project, say a year from now, what changes do you think that people will notice, or what changes do you want to make sure are out there so that you can say we've made a difference and it's more meaningful now?
Well, I'm hoping that these interviews give us the data that we need to ensure that we're presenting information to users in the most effective way, and that we're leveraging knowledge in order to make those evidence-based decisions to make enhancements and changes. So really hoping that we're designing page layouts that are allowing people to quickly and easily find the information that they need, as well as making enhancements to the search features so that it's also supporting users who are searching for information that they're able to quickly and easily find results that they're looking for.
I've been speaking with Kristen Davis. She's chief of the design division at the OCIO at the Library of Congress. Kristen, thanks so much for sharing this project with us. Hopefully you'll get a whole lot more users.
Well, thanks so much, Terry, for having me. This was great talking to you about user research and Congress.gov.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, a new Supreme Court ruling has upended the president's global tariff plan, just as Congress faces fresh pressure to avert a partial shutdown at Homeland Security. It's the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Supreme Court's decision striking down the administration's tariff framework landed in the middle of a crowded stretch on Capitol Hill, where talks to end the DHS partial shutdown have turned to carving agencies out for standalone funding. Lawmakers are also weighing everything from reconciliation plans to aviation safety and the latest FISA fight. We break down what to watch in the days ahead with WTOP's Capitol Hill correspondent, Mitchell Miller. Mitchell, thanks for joining me.
You bet.
Both chambers of Congress were on recess last week, but that didn't mean it was quiet on the Hill. Big Supreme Court decision on Friday overturning the president's global tariff framework. What does that mean for Congress? We were starting to see some votes in opposition to specific tariffs. What do you think will happen now?
Well, this really changes the whole tenor, I think, of this week. You have the State of the Union coming up, and we'll talk about that. But the fact that this ruling came from the Supreme Court on Friday really set in motion a lot of different things for a lot of lawmakers. First of all, there was quick reaction, of course, from the people who have been saying for a long time, including Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat, that these are taxes, that they shouldn't have been imposed, that it is Congress that has to put into effect most tariffs, if not almost all of them. Certainly the president can do some of them. But the argument from many who criticized the president's tariffs from Congress was that this is just usurping the power of Congress. So there was obviously a lot of cheering from Democrats, a lot of criticism from Republicans who say this undermines the president's executive power. But nonetheless, it does indicate that there are going to be some changes in connection with tariffs. I'm sure there will be lots of different types of legislation, executive orders from the president, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth. So this is far from over. But keep in mind that last year, the House essentially voted to keep itself from taking up any type of legislation related to tariffs. And that only expired this year. And it was earlier this month that the House actually voted to allow for something to take place in connection with tariffs. In this case, it was to lift tariffs on Canada as 6 Republican congressmen joined with Democrats. So there is a lot to unpack here, of course, but it certainly changes things here on the Hill for sure.
One of the things that wasn't included in the decision was whether or not the administration has to unwind the tariffs, refund the tariffs that it's already collected. The number I saw there was $134 billion over 2025. As we're still in discussions about 2026 appropriations, do you think that that will have an impact on how the conversations go?
Ultimately, I do. I mean, this is one of the most profound actions the Supreme Court has taken in recent years. And this is so complicated, as we saw from various explanations over the weekend about how to unwind these tariffs. I mean, these are tariffs that literally stretch around the world to enemies and allies. And a lot of companies, of course, are dealing with the impact of tariffs and will be looking to take potentially legal action to try to get their money back.
Well, where do you think that puts us then in terms of the State of the Union?
Well, this is going to be really interesting. For one thing, at the State of the Union, the president is going to be speaking with many of the Supreme Court justices right in front of him. So that will be interesting just from a theatrical standpoint. But then you also have the fact that This will be the only State of the Union address ever made where part of the government was actually shut down. And this is something that the president has said he was not really that concerned about in the days leading up to the State of the Union address. But there's no question that there are some Republicans who are a little bit nervous about the optics of this, having part of the government shut down while the president's trying to outline the State of the Union, literally. What this means in terms of resolving this battle over funding for the Department of Homeland Security is really unclear. I mean, you had this whole week last week where Congress was out and there was just a little bit back and forth, but really no progress related to getting anything done. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not lawmakers try to parse out some of these pieces of legislation, as we've talked about previously, where they might try to fund FEMA and try to fund TSA. But that seems to be pretty complicated at the moment. So this is going to be yet another big week for Congress and the president.
Well, Leader Jeffries has said that he's encouraging the Democrats to attend and behave themselves or attend alternative programming. What do you think? What do you think the audience will be like?
That's right. He really kind of wants the Democrats to sit on their hands. They can protest quietly, but he does not want to cause an incident, as happened in the last speech by the president to the House, where Congressman from Texas, Al Green, got up and yelled and really got a lot of negative reaction related to that from Democrats and Republicans, frankly. So the other thing is there will be this alternate event on the National Mall, including Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, among other lawmakers, where they just say they are protesting the president's policies. They want to provide this alternate event. So we'll see what happens with that. I think it's going to be a very interesting State of the Union, probably one of the most interesting we've seen in many years.
I'm speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Well, Mitchell, in addition to all of that high theater, there are Republicans that are pushing for another reconciliation mega bill in 2026. What would they put in it? And who's on board with that?
Well, that's a really good question. There are a variety of things that they might include. There are some House Republicans on the conservative side who really want to get things in that would deal with economic issues, affordability issues, perhaps lowering the threshold in connection with mortgages, also streamlining a lot of the permitting process in connection with a variety of businesses, and also getting in there some energy legislation, as well as some talk about bringing back some health care provisions, including an HSA of some type and different types of savings accounts. But it's really right now just a lot of ideas, and there is also opposition to this within the Republican Party, in part because the margin, of course, in the House, as we've talked about many times, is so thin that for House Speaker Mike Johnson to get a 2.0 through the House would be very, very difficult. And do Republicans in a midterm election year, do they want to show how hard it is for them to struggle to get legislation, and ultimately what happens if it doesn't pass? So I don't know that that's actually going to move forward, but we're certainly going to hear more talk about it.
It seems like it would take the place of conversations that need to happen on a lot of other legislation. Let's talk about dueling aviation safety bills.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So tonight, there is scheduled to be a vote in the House on what's called the Rotor Act. This has been pushed very hard by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who heads the Commerce Committee in the Senate. The Senate really has bipartisan support in connection with this, and it would essentially streamline a lot of the safety measures that are many lawmakers just feel that they are allowing various loopholes for the military, for example, to get away with not necessarily utilizing all the safety technology that is there. Now, on the other hand, in the House, some of the committee chairs have their own legislation that they say, wait a second, we're getting kind of blindsided here. We didn't know that the House was actually going to vote on this Senate bill so quickly this week. So we'll have to see what happens with that little tussle. But for now, House Speaker Mike Johnson has indicated that this House vote on the Rotor Act will go forward tonight.
Another bill that's getting a lot of attention is extending the FISA coverage.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one, too, because really the push is coming from a handful of lawmakers on the Republican side, as well as the White House. This is from Stephen Miller, the White House domestic policy advisor. He really wants this spying statute under what's called Section 702 of FISA to be extended so that it can be allowed to collect information on non-citizens abroad, overseas, without a warrant. Now, some people think that this would go too far. There's been opposition to it from members of both parties, actually. So it'll be interesting to see if they can get it extended. It is yet another, frankly, legislative headache for House Speaker Mike Johnson because people have such strong feelings about this. And again, he only has that one vote margin.
Sounds like Speaker Johnson needs a big bottle of aspirin.
Certainly does.
Because he may be faced with a war powers vote this week as well.
Right, exactly. So there's been a lot of talk, of course, about what is going to happen with Iran. And now there are more moves in the House, frankly, than there used to be in connection with these war powers resolutions. Again, because of this thin margin, they can move things through a discharge petition and get things to the floor that the House Speaker doesn't necessarily want to have moved. Now, we'll have to see what happens in connection with Iran. The president can take action, of course, at any time. But it is another sign that Congress is trying to reassert itself, whether it's in connection with the tariffs, whether it in connection with war powers resolutions. It really is a changing dynamic now, knowing that the president is in his final term. It's going to be interesting to see how all these issues move forward.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be an exciting week on the Hill.
There's no doubt about that.
Mitchell Miller is Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. House Democrats are pressing Bureau of Prisons leaders on their plans to address longtime staffing shortages. For years, low staffing at BOP has contributed to operational issues and unsafe conditions across the federal prison system. A letter sent Friday to BOP's director says the workforce issues have reached a crisis point. Here with more detail is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
What kind of information are these lawmakers looking for from BOP?
They're looking for a lot more detailed information from the Bureau of Prisons leadership relating to a lot of the staffing issues that they pointed out in this letter that they recently wrote. Essentially, they're looking for information related to some safety concerns at BOP. Those are stemming from low staffing across the agency. They're looking for how much BOP employees are using overtime hours and a process that they commonly use called staff augmentation, where they'll have nurses, teachers, or other BOP staff who are not officers essentially fill in to guard inmates. It's a practice that the agency uses to address staffing shortages and something that the lawmakers are concerned about here. The letter that was sent on Friday gives the BOP director a 30-day deadline to respond to a lot of these requests. And essentially, it's an investigation trying to deep dive into some of the concerns that they've been seeing and hearing from these staff members.
Well, back us up on those concerns. What have the staffing challenges really looked like at BOP over the last several years?
It's something where we've seen some of these concerns grow over time. For instance, with the use of overtime hours by correctional officers and other frontline staff. That's something that is fairly common just because there is low staffing levels across the board. So, for instance, over the last 5 years, the agency saw a 43% increase in how many overtime hours they've been using among frontline employees. And that's, of course, leading in many cases to burnout for staff, low morale, and even some employees who are choosing to leave the agency. And then, as I mentioned, the staff augmentation is another concern from these lawmakers, where you have the employees who are not officers filling in for those positions when there are shortages. So some of those workforce issues have led to other organizations, including the Partnership for Public Service, show that BOP is the lowest ranked place to work in their Best Places to Work series. It's been in that spot for 2 years in a row. It's also some of these issues have led the Government Accountability Office as well to name the management of the federal prison system as one of its high-risk list items. So this is something where it's gaining attention not only in Congress, but from other entities as well.
These trends have been going on and visible for a while now. Are there more recent changes that are adding to the stress at BOP?
Absolutely. There have, in the last year, been some changes to pay and also collective bargaining opportunities for employees. So, for instance, about a year ago now, BOP chose to reduce and in some cases fully remove some retention pay incentives. They said it was due to some budget shortfalls at the time, and that resulted in a 25% pay cut for some employees, somewhere between 10 and 25% pay cut. And some were reportedly starting to leave their jobs for other federal law enforcement positions that were higher paid, for instance, at CBP or ICE. And those retention incentives were restored in January, so earlier this year. So there has been, that shift back towards that, but I think that there's kind of bigger concerns about pay and having a permanent pay increase for the long run still.
Well, there is some legislation that's attempting to address some of those long-standing pay issues at BOP. Tell us about that.
There is a recently introduced bill called the Federal Correctional Officer Paycheck Protection Act. This is something that's coming from bipartisan lawmakers in both the House and Senate. And what it would do is create a permanent 35% pay increase for all frontline BOP staff. Union officials and other advocates for the BOP workforce have said that even though the agency tends to offer recruitment and retention-based pay incentives and bonuses to employees, those are only really a temporary fix to the pay shortages for these employees. So the idea here is to support a workforce that has had a lot of issues with recruiting and retaining staff, especially when they can see other similar types of law enforcement positions from other agencies or elsewhere where they can get higher pay. So the idea there is to try to give them something that's permanent rather than just temporary, and that can be taken away essentially at any time.
These kind of issues seem like they would be right in the ballpark for collective bargaining, but the agency recently canceled its collective bargaining agreement. How is that playing out now with all of these other things arising?
That's something where we've continued hearing from American Federation of Government Employees officials about concerns with the cancellation of collective bargaining. They say that not having that ability to collectively bargain or to negotiate with the agency is leading to some concerns about workplace safety and about the ability for employees to address any issues that they might experience day to day on their jobs. But essentially, if you look at the timeline for how that all happened, last September, the BOP director announced that the agency's union contract would be immediately canceled, and that covered about 30,000 federal employees with the agency. It's very similar to what we've seen across a lot of different agencies in response to President Trump's orders, telling most to cancel their union contracts. And so that's something where it really falls in line with this broader trend that we've seen. But for the BOP specifically, we've seen a lawsuit filed in response to that cancellation that's separate from the larger AFGE lawsuit, and they're alleging that the cancellation of that contract violated various federal laws. So it's something where there's still pushback against that, and it's still kind of playing out. But for the most part now, that is essentially canceled for these employees.
Well, this is such an important issue, and it's been so long running, Drew. So thank you for the update.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman, and you can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.